Thank you. I apologize in advance for being late. If someone would just invent something like GPS or something, I might have made it here on time, but I apologize. Thomas Edison's laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, he called an invention factory. That's what I call the University of Illinois. It's an invention factory and a discovery factory and an innovation factory. And it really is, in my mind, a major national asset and certainly one of the most productive assets for our home state of Illinois. There was a time that I can remember back in the 1970s and 80s when some of my colleagues in Washington decided to do something significant for the National Institutes of Health. It was an interesting coalition. John Porter, Republican congressman from the North Shore of Chicago, north of Chicago. Arlen Specter, Republican from Pennsylvania. Tom Harkin, Democrat from Iowa. And they set a goal which was lofty. They wanted to double the budget of the National Institutes of Health, and they did it. It really went unheralded, and it should have been recognized for what it meant. It was such a dramatic step forward when it came to research. And what has happened to us as a nation since those days? The numbers tell the story. Between 1960 and 1980, federal R&D spending as a share of GDP averaged 1.52%, 1960, 1980. Last year, federal R&D investments averaged about half, 0.8%. This steady decline has led to a cumulative $1.5 trillion research investment deficit in the United States of America. More troubling than that, at least as troubling, if not more troubling, is the fact that many researchers have become discouraged. The average age 30 years ago of researchers was in the 30s. Well, that age has increased dramatically as younger researchers has dropped off, saying there just aren't enough opportunities there for federally sponsored research. Dr. Francis Collins is an extraordinary man, heads up the National Institute of Health, and a couple of years ago I went out to see him. And I said, he was the one who mastered the Human Genome Project and a few other modest achievements. And I said to him, I can't promise you that I can double this research investment as they did 20 or 30 years ago, but what can I do? And he said, if you can give me 5% real growth, 5% real growth in NIH research for 10 years, I'll light up the scoreboard. Because people will know it's coming, and that it's coming each year. And they can embark on projects that may not be accomplished in 1 year. It may take longer. So we sat down and said, what if, in the biomedical area, what if we had 5% real growth over inflation for 10 straight years? And what if we had that growth at the National Institutes of Health, CDC, Veterans, and Department of Defense, all in medical research? How much would it cost? And the answer was somewhere in the range of $150 billion for that delta, for that difference in the investment in that biomedical area. Okay, over the next 10 years, how much will we be spending as a nation when it comes to our federal budgets? About $25 trillion. 150 billion, 25 trillion, do the math. And you can see that it's not a crazy idea that we could reach that. So I introduced a bill called the American Cures Act and said, let's set that as a goal and let's find a way to reach it. Then I had a fortuitous breakfast invitation with Dr. Ernest Moniz, who is Secretary of Energy and an extraordinary man. Parenthetically, were it not for Ernest Moniz, I don't know that there would have been an agreement between the United States and Iran when it came to the nuclear weaponry in that country. He knew what he was talking about and was able to accomplish that as much as anyone. I sat down with Dr. Moniz and we talked about research, and I said, I've got the American Cures Act, and I said, Dr. Moniz, do you know that once every 67 seconds in America, someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's? Once every 67 seconds? I questioned my staff. I said, that can't be true. 67 seconds? It's true. And I said, we are going to embark now on medical research on the brain to try to find a way to delay the onset, even a few months, of the worst outcomes in Alzheimer's. Maybe delay for more than that, if possible, and God willing, find a cure. And do you know what it means to us as federal taxpayers? Last year we spent $200 billion on Alzheimer's in Medicare and Medicaid. That doesn't come close to the total cost from the private side and the personal sacrifice of families. Think about how we could have this return on the American Cures Act, the $150 billion 10-year investment just on that one disease. And Moniz listened patiently, and he said, Senator, he knew I was a liberal arts lawyer, he said, Senator, do you know the progress that's being made in imaging Alzheimer's? I said, yeah, I've read about that. It used to be, it could only be done after someone had died, that you discovered actually that they were victims of Alzheimer's. He said, do you know where that imaging is taking place? And I said, no. He said, right here in the Department of Energy, in the Office of Science. So it took me back a little bit. And he said, so if you're talking about research and cures and innovation, I'm glad you started where you did, with biomedical research in those 4 agencies. But you need to expand that. You need to expand it to other areas of research in the federal government. So that's why we have 2 bills, the American Cures Act and the American Innovation Act. The Innovation Act takes the Department of Energy, NIST, many other agencies, NSF, and gives them the 5% real growth. Now, how much did that add to the total bill, you big spending liberal Durbin? It added $100 billion over 10 years. So there you have it. $250 billion for those key agencies over 10 years against the $25 trillion federal budget. Well, it's easy, relatively easy, to introduce a bill and even to find a handful of willing co-sponsors. But it's tougher if you try to implement it and make it work. And I set out to do that. You know, I had to make a decision a couple years ago whether to run again. A lot of people say, Durbin, you're a career politician, guilty as charged. And I had to decide what would motivate me to want to take another 6 years in the Senate. Number 1 on the list was research and medical research. And so I set out and decided to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I'm in the minority now. And so I went to Roy Blunt, a conservative from Missouri, chairing the subcommittee that has NIH and those medical agencies. And I said, Roy, you're up for re-election. You're a good conservative Republican. I'm sure they're all going to love you. But what are you going to say to the rest of those voters in Missouri, the independents, and even the Democrats? What are you going to talk about? I could suggest to you there's one topic you can talk to all of them about, medical research, and you can be the man. Well, we started working together, and when it was all said and done, we got it done. There's so much bad news coming out of Washington. Here's the good news. In this fiscal year that we're currently in, there's going to be an almost 7% increase in NIH funding, $2 billion. That's more than 5% over inflation. Virtually the same thing true for Centers for Disease Control. An even larger number when it comes to the Department of Defense medical research. That happens to be my subcommittee. And an equally large number when it comes to veterans. And when it comes to those other agencies we talked about, they're in the range of 6 and 7% too. So the good news is this. We have come together on a bipartisan basis to really try to set a standard and to try to make sure that we move forward in research, not just biomedical research, but overall research and innovation in the federal government. What does it mean? You know better than I do. I was just up in Peoria at OSF at the JUMP facility. I still can't get over that name. The JUMP research operation, where the Illinois Medical School and the Department of Engineering from this university are coming together. And they started showing me little things that even politicians can understand. And one of them was a model. It was a plastic model of a human heart. And they handed it to me, and it was small. I held it in one hand. And they said, this is the heart of an infant suffering from some serious congenital heart defects who's facing surgery. We took an MRI and a CAT scan of that infant's heart and reproduced it through 3D copying, so that the surgeon before the surgery could see it, hold it, open it, and look inside. The object, of course, is a successful surgery, and to make sure that that infant is on that heart-lung machine as little as possible. And I looked at it and thought to myself, this is incredible. I cannot imagine what it must mean to that surgeon to have the capacity to look inside before they've actually opened the chest of that little baby. That's a tiny thing that even a politician can understand. And I think there are more opportunities ahead, and you're going to be a part of it. We've got to find ways to cure disease, to find breakthroughs, to use this intelligence and knowledge that God's given us to really find these cures. The federal government has found a way over the years to make these investments. It's time for us to renew them. We've got to be able to provide the tools and opportunities for the next generation of Americans to get into your field or to take advantage of what you found in this field. Roy Blunt called me after he came home and we passed this budget, and he said, we've got to do this again. I said, I know we do. He said, we can't be one-hit wonders. And that's exactly what I'm committed to do, is to make sure that what we established in this year's fiscal budget will be replicated in next year's budget. It won't be easy, but I do sense that there is a growing bipartisan coalition to get that done. The bottom line is, we trust you. We trust the accumulated knowledge in this room to take advantage of these research opportunities. You've got to help us make the case, as we've done so often before. The Human Genome Project has been one of the best single investments in the history of the United States of America. We achieved it, and now we're reaping the benefits for many, many decades to come. Thank you all for what you do and for letting me join you this afternoon. I think that Professor Schiffer is going to come and introduce a few more folks who'd like to say a few words about this. Thanks, everybody.
If we have a few minutes, I'd like to invite the Senator back to the microphone just to take a few questions from the media or from others in the audience with regard to federal funding for research or, of course, anything else.
Yes.
Senator Durbin, Cheese Harris with WCCU. So you've been called a champion for research. Can you talk about your personal emotional conviction?
I don't think there are many of us who have not been through that moment or heard of that moment in our families where you go into a doctor's office and there's a diagnosis and it scares the hell out of you, either for yourself or a member of your family. And after you've heard it, your first question to that doctor is there anything out there? Is there a drug? Is there a surgery? Is there a procedure? Is there any hope? And you pray to God that there is. And for so many people, the answer is yes. We are now moving in this area and think that there's a chance that we can alleviate the suffering, maybe save the patient. We're moving in that direction. I've been through that personally, and virtually everybody in the room has in some way, shape, or form. And it makes you a believer in medical research because you know how vulnerable we all are. Something might happen this evening, tomorrow morning, next week, that could threaten our lives or threaten the lives of somebody we dearly love. And if you've made the research commitment, if you have the answer, it is the greatest feeling in the world. And so that's what inspired me, from a personal viewpoint and family viewpoint.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions, and let me ask you a question to maybe prompt some. What am I missing? What is it the politicians are missing that makes a difference here? Now I got some responses. Yes, please identify yourself.
Senator, my name is Rohit Bhargav. I'm an NIH-funded cancer researcher and a professor of bioengineering here. I think, first of all, I want to really express our gratitude for your support and the increase in NIH funding in particular. I mean, this is a lifeline for a lot of us who make advances based on NIH support. But one point I think I would love to input to you and your team. What is happening at the University of Illinois today is really a new way to look at medicine. You heard from Imad, you heard hints about the Engineering-Based College of Medicine. It's wonderful that we've been able to increase the NIH funding, but the increase cannot be the same old, because the same old for the last 40 years has moved us only so far. There are new approaches that our university is coming up with, the Engineering-Based College of Medicine, a technology-based cancer center, for example, and other approaches that really promise to change the way much more efficiently, just like we've done in industry, just like we've done in IT, just like we've done in many other fields. If we apply the same expertise that's at our university to medicine and diseases like cancer or Parkinson's, I think we have a much better shot at making progress than investing more in the same.
Well, okay, wait a minute, don't sit down. Give me more. What are you talking about? Are you saying that the NIH-style grant, category grant, is not broad enough?
I think it's not broad enough to include certain kinds of fields that have traditionally not been well represented. So I'll give you an example. When we talk about cancer research, we traditionally think about cancer biology. Because 40 years ago, we didn't quite understand what are the molecules that are involved in making cancer what it is. Now we understand them quite well. The advances in molecular biology have been tremendous. Now what we want to do is invest in making new kinds of nanoparticles, for example, that use that biology and go and target cancers so that your hair doesn't fall off when you go in for cancer research, so that the toxicity from a cancer drug doesn't actually kill the patient. The cancer didn't kill the patient, the drug killed them. So we want to prevent those kinds of things. We have the tools. The human genome does give us the tools. We understand a lot of molecular biology. But now we need to take the next step. And without that next step, we wouldn't benefit patients. We would create lots of knowledge, but we now need to bring that knowledge to bear on new technologies, new drugs, new devices that can actually be used quite rapidly.
Stick with me here. So I want to understand this, and the education of a senator is a daunting task. And so what I'm trying to get to is, are you saying that if you have to go through the traditional NIH application process, you can't include those elements from other disciplines that could be the secret to success?
I think more daunting than educating a senator is educating people in the biomedical field who are stuck in the way that they've done things for many decades. It's not obvious to people, especially in tight times. So you often hear this thing that I'm a molecular biologist, my lab has been funded for 30 years, and it's going to change. Well, in 30 years, the question is, what did you do to take that knowledge into a patient? Maybe we need to have other opportunities, broader opportunities to do this. So it's very difficult to move the needle at NIH with the same thought process. For example, we have the opportunity here with the new College of Medicine that is an engineering-based College of Medicine, but there is no support from the NIH for such initiatives, for example. You couldn't have done what we did here at Harvard or Johns Hopkins or something because the medical enterprise is so focused on what they've traditionally done, and rightly so. I mean, there's lots of progress. You couldn't have done these things there, but we can do this here. But there's no category at the NIH, for example, to say, if you're bringing a new approach to teaching students, if you're bringing a new approach to medicine, here's the funding support for you that we would enable. And those kind of decisions perhaps need to.
And I have to imagine that Dr. Collins and the Human Genome Project was doing just that. It had to go beyond, not simple, but basic medical biotechnology, biology, liberal arts, and into technology and computations and things that really made it happen. So he must be aware of this.
We are moving, but we can move faster.
Okay,
I think that's it.
good, thank you.
Thank you.
There was another question, yes, sir?
Hi. Sam Bashirs, I'm coordinator of the Neuroscience Graduate Program. Unrelated to this, I've been working on a short presentation on general ideas of progress, and so I asked some doctors for their ideas, and they're very quick to talk about all the incredible medical advances over the last 50 years, and they're equally quick to talk about backsliding in terms of reemergence of infectious disease or new infectious disease or declining infrastructure such as water quality that allows diseases to flourish that haven't, anti-scientific attitudes, poor economic incentives that prevent progress in other ways. So this is just a comment. There's a much broader political problem than just funding the NIH, and I hope in some way this comment will add the case that you can make to your colleagues.
Well,
May I sit down?
sure. Let me pick up on a piece of that and the anti-scientific whatever. Sure, I mean, it's alive and well, and climate denial and such. It's a popular industry in Washington. But this has been interesting to me, that some of the most conservative / Tea Party conservative Republicans are signing up for this and saying, we want to make this investment. So despite their arguments on any given issue, whether it's the impact of GMOs in food or climate science, they're signing up here. And I don't want to rock the boat and tell them that they're, rewarding tree-hugging scientists. But I do want to keep them on board, because I think when it gets to the biomedical, it's really pretty basic in terms of survival of our race and survival of these, our friends. So don't be discouraged by some of these other variations. I think we're putting together an interesting coalition. And there's a competition on, and this gets into the weeds of my business, between discretionary spending and mandatory spending. And discretionary spending is literally that. Each year we have about $1.3 trillion to spend on the discretionary side. And that's for everything, from the Department of Defense right on down to keeping the lights on Capitol Hill. And then there are mandatory programs, think Social Security, Veterans Program, Medicare, and the like. There's at least conversation underway in another committee to make part of the research, medical research, a mandatory program. And I've said to them, though I'm on the Appropriations Committee, which is considered the antagonist, I'm up for the highest bidder. Whoever puts the most money on the table on a predictable, consistent basis, I'll sign up for it. If it's an appropriations approach, great. If it's a mandatory approach, great. Usually on a mandatory approach, though, you have to have a revenue source. You've got to have some funding. And that's when it gets tricky. That's when we get in, I think, closer to what your question asked. You know, because when I stood up and said, okay, I'm going to pay for the American Cures Act, half of it right off the bat, $1 on every tobacco product in America. Dollar tax goes right into medical research. That's half of my American Cures Act. Couldn't find a single member on the other side of the aisle who would sign up for, quote, a new tax, even on tobacco. I mean, just wouldn't do it. So I'm kind of walking my way through this minefield. We had a good year. If we have another one and another one, we're going to create a pattern where people will not want to disappoint in the future, whether it's mandatory or discretionary. Last question, please.
Thank you for coming, Senator Durbin. I want to speak to the point about reaching across the aisle to your colleagues. I really appreciate that you're concerned about the survival of the human race. I sometimes get the sense that the other side is more concerned about the survival of businesses today. And I would like to make the point to you that I think these things are not incompatible. That here at the University of Illinois right now, biomedical research being funded by efforts like yours is also leading to economic growth and to cost savings within the health system, which, as we know, has been a major political issue for us as a nation. We've been attempting to constrain costs, and the beautiful thing is that saving lives and saving money can go hand in hand together, but we have to make the kind of investment that you've been making. I'm an entrepreneur myself. It's research that started as very esoteric work funded by the NSF and eventually flowed into funding from the NIH, and the NIH has kept my business alive at a time when, you know, money didn't really flow out of the capital markets very easily, and now we're very successful. And all of that is a business success as much as it is a human health success. And I think that there's common cause on both sides, that everyone either likes to make a lot of money or likes to save lives, but we can all agree that somewhere we can come together on these things.
I think so too. But let me tell you the challenge, and I see it now on a more regular basis. We have made some dramatic progress in terms of improving the quality of medical care and walking away from fee-for-service and talking to the medical community, doctors, hospitals, medical professionals about results and reducing the readmission rates, or infection and readmission rates of patients. And all of that has, for the first time, bent the curve on the growth of healthcare costs in this country, with one exception, pharma. Pharma. The name Schwelke mean anything to you? Everybody knows that name, or many do. And it shows you, and we've got this coming at us in new cases as well. There is no limitation on the charges for the products that are generated by this research. And many times they reach obscene levels. And when they do, people react as they did to this fella. And they're doing now with another drug that has been, I read about this morning in the newspaper. And this creates a burden on us in government. How do we keep the incentive for investment, the patience of someone investing money over a long period of time, with the reward at the end not only being the alleviation of suffering, but monetary? How do we keep that and still keep the cost of medicine at least within reach and not growing too fast? Secondly, what about the companies that take advantage of our basic research here or there and the other place, who say, thank you very much, we're moving to Europe. We don't want to pay taxes in this country anymore, or at least we want to pay a lot less. So there are policy questions associated with this. I think they're all soluble. I think we can get to a solution for each of these. But again, we have to sit down on a policy basis and figure out how to keep that entrepreneurial incentive in place and not let it get out of hand. We've faced this throughout our history with our free market system. and we're facing it again in the medical field. Thanks for all you do. I appreciate the invitation to be with you today.